My name is Daniel. I'm 34 years old, single, and for the last decade, I've worked as a senior systems analyst for a healthcare software company. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays well, it's stable, and most importantly, it allows me to work fully remote. I've always been the responsible one in my family, the planner, the saver, the one who thought 5 steps ahead while everyone else lived in the moment. I live alone in a modest 2-bedroom apartment that I rent on the edge of the city. It's nothing fancy, but it's quiet, clean, and has fiber internet strong enough to support my work. I don't need much. I've never been interested in flashy cars or expensive clothes. My biggest indulgence is good coffee and the occasional weekend trip when deadlines allow. For the past 4 years, I've been saving aggressively. No vacations abroad, no impulse purchases, no lifestyle upgrades. My goal was simple: buy my first home outright, or as close to it as possible. A small place, something manageable, something that felt like mine. I finally reached that goal last winter. The night I realized my savings had crossed the threshold I'd been working toward, I just sat there staring at my banking app, feeling a strange mix of relief and disbelief. Years of saying no to myself had finally turned into something tangible. The next morning, without really thinking it through, I called my parents. They were the first people I told. "Mom," I said when she picked up, "I did it. I finally saved enough for a down payment." "Oh, Daniel," she replied warmly, "that's wonderful news. Your father will be so proud." I could hear her smiling through the phone. "What kind of place are you thinking of buying?" she asked. "I'm looking at small houses, maybe a 2-bedroom, enough space for an office and a guest room, nothing crazy." There was a pause, a familiar one. "A 2-bedroom?" she repeated slowly. "Yeah," I said. "It's just me. I don't need much." "Well," she began, dragging the word out, "you should really think bigger." I laughed softly. "Bigger how?" "At least 4 bedrooms," she said matter-of-factly. "You need room to grow into." I leaned back in my chair, already sensing where this was going. "Grow into what, exactly?" "Daniel," she said patiently, as if explaining something obvious to a child, "you won't be single forever. One day you'll get married. You'll have kids. You don't want to be stuck in a tiny house when that happens." I'd heard versions of this speech for years. "Mom," I said, "I'm not even dating anyone, and even if I were, that's not exactly around the corner." "That's because you work too much. You isolate yourself. If you had a proper home, you'd host people, build a life." I exhaled through my nose. "I already have a life." She changed the subject soon after, but the seed had been planted. Over the next few weeks, the comments continued. Subtle at first, then less so. When I visited for Sunday dinner, my dad casually mentioned how real estate is an investment and how bigger properties always appreciate better. My mom started sending me listings she found online, large suburban houses with sprawling kitchens, multiple bathrooms, and price tags that made my stomach tighten. I ignored most of them. I hired a realtor named Mark, a calm, no-pressure guy who listened when I explained exactly what I wanted. He showed me a handful of small homes and townhouses that fit my budget perfectly. Each time I found something I liked, I made the mistake of mentioning it to my parents. "That neighborhood is too far from us. The schools aren't great. The layout is awkward. Where would guests stay?" Guests, always guests. 2 months into the process, my mom asked if she could come along to one of the viewings, just to see. I hesitated. I should have said no, but saying no to my parents had never been my strong suit. It always felt easier to give in than to deal with the guilt that followed. From that point on, everything shifted. Mark started including larger houses in our tours, places I hadn't asked to see. My mom lit up every time. "Just imagine," she'd say, stepping into a spacious living room, "Christmas here, family dinners, everyone together." My dad would nod approvingly, pointing out structural details and talking about how solid the house felt. I kept reminding them, and myself, that these places were far beyond what I wanted. Some were even beyond what I could comfortably afford. But after weeks of searching, exhaustion began to creep in. Every small house felt wrong to them. Every compromise seemed to land on my shoulders.
Then, one afternoon, Mark showed us a 5-bedroom house on a quiet cul-de-sac. It had a finished basement, a large backyard, and a detached garage. It was beautiful, way too beautiful, and way too expensive. I didn't say much during the tour. My mom did enough talking for all of us. "This would be perfect," she said, her eyes shining. "Absolutely perfect." That night, I ran the numbers over and over again. The mortgage would stretch me thin. I'd have to cut back even more than I already had. No safety net, no margin for error. But technically, I could do it. When I told my parents I was considering the house, they were ecstatic. "You won't regret this," my dad said. "This is the smart move." I wasn't convinced, but I was tired. Tired of pushing back, tired of defending my choices, and somewhere deep down, a small voice whispered that maybe they were right. Maybe thinking bigger meant thinking smarter. Before making an offer, I decided to stop by my parents' place to talk in person. It was a Saturday afternoon. I still had a key to their house, the same house I grew up in, a 3-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood they'd lived in for over 30 years. I let myself in, calling out as I closed the door behind me. "Mom? Dad?" No answer, but I could hear voices coming from the dining room. I walked down the hallway, about to announce myself, when I heard my name. "Daniel has no idea," my mom was saying, her voice low and confident. I froze. "He's almost ready to put in an offer," my dad replied. "That house is perfect." "For us," my mom corrected with a laugh. I felt my heart begin to pound. "So once he buys it," my mom continued, "we'll sell this place and move in with him. Plenty of room, and we'll finally be done worrying about bills." My vision narrowed. "And Daniel?" my older sister, Laura, asked through the speakerphone. "Of course he will," my mom said dismissively. "What else is he going to do with all that space? He's alone, always has been." My stomach dropped. "This way," my dad added, "we can give this house to you and Mike. You'll need it with the kids." I felt like the floor had vanished beneath me. "So he doesn't suspect anything?" Laura asked. My mom laughed. "Not a thing. He always listens. We've got him exactly where we want him." I stood there, rooted in place, my hands shaking. They weren't worried about my future. They were planning theirs on my back. I backed away quietly, then deliberately walked back to the front door and shut it loudly. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone home?" Mom's voice immediately shifted. "Daniel, we're in the dining room, sweetheart." I plastered on a smile and walked in, my mind racing. They greeted me like nothing was wrong, like they hadn't just laid out a plan to take over my life. As we sat there talking about houses and logistics, I realized something that made my chest tighten even more than the betrayal itself. They never intended to ask. They had already decided, and they assumed I wouldn't dare say no.
I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my mother's voice again. "We've got him exactly where we want him." The words echoed in my head like a cruel chant. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, wondering how long they'd been planning it. Weeks? Months? Years? By morning, my shock had hardened into something else. Clarity. For the first time, I wasn't questioning whether I'd misunderstood them. I hadn't. There was no ambiguity, no room for excuses. They hadn't slipped up. They hadn't misspoken. They'd spoken freely, assuming I wasn't there, assuming I was exactly who they believed I be to be. Predictable, controllable, convenient. I went through the next few days on autopilot. I answered work emails, joined video meetings, made coffee, nodded at the right moments. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. My parents called constantly. "Any updates?" my mom asked cheerfully. "Did you talk to Mark again?" my dad followed up. "You don't want to lose that house," my mom reminded me. "We've already started thinking about how to arrange the furniture." We. The word made my jaw tighten. Instead of confronting them immediately, I did something I'd never done before. I stopped reacting. I gave vague answers. Still waiting, paperwork issues, the sellers being difficult. I could hear my mom growing anxious with each non-answer, but I stayed calm, detached, observant. It was strange, almost fascinating watching the dynamic shift. The more neutral I became, the more they pushed. A week later, my mom invited me to a large family gathering, one of those obligatory get-togethers she loved. Extended family, loud conversations, forced cheer. Normally, I would have found a reason to skip it. This time, I said yes. The house was already buzzing when I arrived. Aunts and uncles crowded the living room, cousins chasing kids through the hallway, plates of food balanced on laps. My parents moved through all it like hosts at a victory party. Mom spotted me the second I walked in. "There he is," she announced loudly, pulling me into a hug. "Our future homeowner." Several heads turned. I smiled politely, feeling my pulse steady instead of spike. Laura was there too, sitting on the couch with her husband Mike. She avoided my eyes. Dinner was loud and chaotic. People asked about work, the market, inflation. I answered politely but briefly. I noticed how often my parents steered the conversation back to housing, to space, to planning ahead. After dessert, my mom clinked her glass. "I just want to say something," she announced, smiling broadly. "We have such exciting news in this family." The room quieted. She turned toward me. "Daniel has finally decided to buy a big house." Murmurs rippled through the room. "A really big one, plenty of space for everyone." I felt dozens of eyes on me. "And," she added, gripping my dad's hand, "once he does, your father and I will be moving in with him." The room went completely silent. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. My dad nodded proudly. "It just makes sense. We're getting older and Daniel has room. Family takes care of family." They both looked at me expectantly, waiting for confirmation, for obedience, for the final seal on a plan I'd never agreed to. I stood up slowly. "I'm not buying a house for you." You could have dropped a pin. My mom blinked. "What?" "I'm not buying a house so you can move in," I repeated calmly. "That's not happening." Aunt Carol gasped. Someone whispered my name. My mom laughed nervously. "Daniel, don't joke like that." "I'm not joking." My dad's expression hardened. "You already said you were getting the house." "I said I was considering a house, not that I'd be housing anyone else." "But you have all that space," my mom insisted. "What else would you use it for?" "I don't have that space," I said evenly, "because I'm not buying that house." Laura finally looked at me, her eyes wide. "What do you mean you're not buying it?" "I mean," I met her gaze, "that I heard everything." My mom's face drained of color. "Heard what?" she asked, though her voice had already lost its confidence. "The conversation you had when you thought I wasn't there, about how you'd convinced me to buy a big house so you could move in, about selling this house to Laura, about how I'd do whatever you tell me." Silence swallowed the room. My dad opened his mouth, closed it. "That's not," my mom started. "Don't," I said. "Just don't." My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. "You planned my future without me," I continued. "You mocked me. You treated me like a financial solution, not a son." "That's not fair," my dad snapped. "Everything we did was for the family." "For which family?" I asked, because it certainly wasn't for me. Laura stood up abruptly. "You're exaggerating." "No," I replied. "I'm finally paying attention." My mom started crying, loudly, theatrically. "How could you embarrass us like this?" she sobbed. "In front of everyone." I let out a slow breath. "You embarrassed yourselves," I said. "I just stopped playing along." I picked up my jacket. "For the record," I added, "I did buy a house." My mom's head snapped up, hope flickering in her eyes. "But it's not here," I finished, "and you'll never live in it." Gasps again, whispers, shock. "Where?" my dad demanded. "That's none of your business." I walked out without another word. The calls started before I reached my car. Voicemail after voicemail. Texts, missed calls from numbers I hadn't heard from in years. I blocked them all. That night, sitting alone in my apartment, I felt something unfamiliar. Peace.
The fallout was immediate.
By the next morning, my phone was unusable. I had blocked my parents and Laura, but the messages still came through cousins, aunts, old family friends I hadn't spoken to in years. People who had never once checked in on me suddenly felt entitled to my time, my explanations, my guilt. Your mother is devastated. Your father feels betrayed. They're embarrassed. Family doesn't treat family like this. I didn't respond. For once, I let the silence do the talking. A week later, my Aunt Denise left a voicemail that finally made me laugh, an exhausted, hollow laugh that surprised even me. "They already sold the house," she said. "I don't know what they were thinking." I did. They had been so certain of my compliance that they'd finalized everything without a safety net. They'd signed papers, transferred ownership, celebrated early, all based on an assumption that I'd never push back. Laura called from an unknown number 2 days later. I almost didn't answer. "Where are Mom and Dad supposed to live now?" she demanded without greeting. I leaned back in my chair. "They live with you." That was supposed to be temporary. "So was their plan to live with me," I replied. "Funny how that works." "You ruined everything," she snapped. "No," I said calmly. "I just didn't sacrifice myself to fix it." She hung up. I found out through relatives that the living situation had deteriorated quickly. My dad clashed constantly with Mike, who didn't appreciate being treated like a guest in his own home. My mom criticized everything: how Laura parented, how she cooked, how she organized the house. Tension filled every room. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had tried to escape responsibility by pushing it onto me, only to land somewhere they no longer had control. Meanwhile, my own life was quietly transforming. The house I bought was exactly what I'd always wanted: a modest 3-bedroom in a different state, tucked into a quiet neighborhood surrounded by trees. 1 bedroom for me, 1 for an office, 1 flexible space I hadn't even decided how to use yet. No excess, no pressure, no ghosts of other people's expectations lingering in the walls. Moving day felt surreal. As the plane lifted off, I turned my phone on airplane mode and watched the city I'd grown up in shrink beneath the clouds. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The first night in my new house, I slept better than I had in years. No anxiety, no waiting for the next demand, no mental rehearsals for conversations I dreaded. Just silence and the steady knowledge that every decision from here on out was mine. Over the next few weeks, I built a routine that felt like breathing after years underwater. Morning walks, coffee at a local cafe where no one knew my last name, workdays uninterrupted by emergencies that somehow always involved money. I made friends slowly, intentionally, people who asked about me, not what I could provide. 3 months after the move, my Aunt Denise called again. "They're not doing well," she admitted. "They didn't plan for this at all." "I know," I said gently. "They're talking about renting, starting over." "They can," I replied. "They did before." She paused. "You're not going to help them." It wasn't a question. "No," I said. "I already gave them years of my life. That was enough." That night, I walked through my house appreciating the quiet ownership of it all. Every piece of furniture was chosen by me. Every corner reflected my needs, not obligations disguised as love. I stood in my office doorway, looking at the desk where I worked, the window where the afternoon light poured in, the space that existed because I'd finally said no. I wasn't heartless. I was healed. Some people will always confuse boundaries with betrayal, especially when they benefit from you having none. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, my phone buzzed with a message from a new hiking group I'd joined. "Trail at sunrise tomorrow? You in?" I smiled. Absolutely, because for the first time in my life, my future belonged to me, and no one else got to decide what I owed them.
6 months passed, long enough for the shock to wear off, long enough for the dust to settle.
long enough for the people involved to realize that what I'd done wasn't a tantrum, it was permanent. I hadn't heard my parents' voices since that night, not directly anyway. They still tried. Blocked numbers became new numbers. Emails came from addresses I didn't recognize at first. Once, a handwritten letter arrived at my old apartment, forwarded by the new tenant, filled with dramatic apologies that somehow never included the words, "We were wrong." I didn't respond, not because I was angry, but because for the first time I understood something I'd never truly accepted before. Access to me was a privilege, not a right. Through extended family, I learned what had unfolded after I left. Living with Laura had gone from temporary to unbearable in less than 2 months. My parents clashed with her husband constantly. My mother criticized how Laura raised her kids, how she kept the house, how she spent money. My father refused to acknowledge that it was no longer his home. Eventually, Laura snapped. She gave them a deadline. They moved into a small rental apartment across town. 2 bedrooms, no yard, no extra space. The exact kind of place they'd insisted was beneath me. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Laura didn't speak to me for months after that. When she finally did, it wasn't to apologize, it was to complain. "You really left us to deal with all of this," she said bitterly over the phone. "No," I replied calmly. "You agreed to it when you thought it benefited you." She hung up. That was the last time we spoke. And you know what surprised me most? I didn't miss them. Not in the way I thought I would. What I missed wasn't them, it was the version of family I'd spent my whole life hoping they could be, the one that didn't exist, the one I kept trying to earn through compliance, generosity, and silence. Once I stopped chasing that illusion, the grief softened. Life, on the other hand, expanded. In my new city, I built something steady and real. My work thrived without constant emotional interruptions. I started dating, not because someone pressured me to, but because I actually wanted to. I made friends who respected boundaries without needing them explained. People who didn't see me as a solution to their problems. One evening, while sitting on my porch watching the sun drop behind the trees, I realized something else. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. No more bracing for the next demand. No more rehearsing how to say no. No more guilt for choosing myself. Just quiet confidence. About a year after the family gathering, the night everything changed, I received one final email from my mother. It was short. She said she didn't understand my choices, that she still believed family should stick together, that she hoped I'd come to my senses someday. I read it once. Then I archived it. Not out of spite, out of acceptance. Some people never learn that love without control feels like loss to them. That's not something I could fix, and it wasn't my responsibility to try. I closed my laptop and stepped outside. The air was cool. The world felt open. Mine. I'd lost a version of my family, but I'd gained my life, and I wouldn't trade that for the biggest house in the world.